Hello and welcome to this next presentation here at ABG Investor Days. My name is Simon Granat and I will be moderating this presentation, and I work as an equity analyst at ABG covering tech and IT companies. With us today we have the pleasure of welcoming Johan Nordqvist, who is the CEO of Briox. And with that said, Johan, please go ahead and present the company.
Thank you very much. As said, I'm Johan Nordqvist and I'm the CEO of Briox as of May this year. Before I begin, I just want to extend a thank you to ABG for arranging this day and for, of course, everybody listening to this presentation. I think most of you are familiar with Briox, but for those of you who are not, we're a software as a service company that develops and sells our own ERP system that enables collaborative accounting between accounting agencies and their customers operating in Finland and the Baltics. Move on to the next slide, please. What I will try to do in the next 15 to 20 minutes or so is to give you a brief introduction to Briox. This includes a brief history of the company, a look at our board and our management, the markets in which we operate, our product, and our sales model. I will also then spend quite a bit of time trying to explain our business model and how, with focus on how it's designed to help us scale up and drive growth in the coming, hopefully very exciting years. So with that, if we move on to slide 4, please. Good. The history of Briox dates back to about 10 years, although it's been operating in its current form for about 4 years. I'm sure close to all of you are familiar with Fort Knox. In 2020, Fort Knox wanted to take its product offering outside of Sweden. And as part of this decision, a spin-off company was formed, which got the name Fort Knox International, with the objective to introduce the product to primarily the UK, Finland, and Germany. So in the coming years then, quite significant time was spent on adapting the product, although the platform was the same, but to adapt the product so that it fit local customer needs and also legal requirements. And about 2 years later, it was ready to be launched. And in the coming years, then quite a lot of efforts were made into signing up partners in these markets, both strategic accounting partners and integration partners. Although a lot of progress was made, the German and the UK markets proved to be quite difficult to get into and scale up quickly. So in 2016, an important decision was made to focus all of the efforts on the Finnish market. This is also when the company got its name Briox, which it operates with today. And this proved to be quite a good strategy. The business picked up. A local sales team in the local office was established in Helsinki, and more accounting agencies were brought on board. So in the coming years, we have established collaboration with several important integration partners, such as many of the leading banks, Holvi, Servant, and some other players, and also formed partnerships with many of the leading accounting agencies in Finland, BDO to mention one. In the past year, we also moved into Estonia, where we now, as of this year, have people on the ground in an office in Tallinn. And as of this year, we have also entered the markets in Latvia and Lithuania, where we now have local salespeople since about 6 months back. I came on board about 6 months ago, as I said. In this year, we've also strengthened the board, which I'll talk to in a second. And at this present time, we have partnerships with about 170 accounting agencies in the 4 markets in which we operate. If we move to the next slide, please. Here you can see the board of Briox. And I'm bringing this up to demonstrate that we have significant experience and expertise when it comes to the ERP and specifically the accounting industry. We have the chairman in Johan Nordqvist, who was actually the CEO of Briox himself during 2010 to 2016 to 2018. He's also working in several other SaaS companies and very familiar with this industry. We're also fortunate to have one of the co-founders and the former CEO of Fort Knox on the Briox board in Jens Koldskog. Jens has been working pretty much his entire professional career with ERP systems and accounting. He also has significant time in Visma, which is the same as Daniel de Souza, who was brought on board now this year. Daniel was formerly the CEO of Visma SBCS. And we are also very pleased to have Helena Westin on the board, who I dare to say is one of the leading people in Sweden when it comes to marketing and PR. She's been the head of marketing for several big Swedish companies, and she's now on the board of several big companies, including the Swedish television. Moving to the next slide. As I mentioned before, we have, and I want to underline this, we have sharpened our focus and now fully focus on winning together with accounting agencies. There are different ways how you can get to the sort of the small and medium-sized enterprises and their end users, but we believe the right way for us is to go through and work with the accounting agencies. And some claim that the accounting agencies and the accounting industry is facing somewhat of a grim future, with a lot of services being automated. We have services being outsourced and so forth. At Briox, we do not think so. In fact, we think that the accounting industry is facing quite a bright future if and for those who are able to adapt. This is a big industry. We have pretty much all the companies in our markets. They very much appreciate help from accounting agencies. But having said that, the accounting industry is already going through a major transformation. We're seeing that clearly in Sweden, but also in the markets in which we operate, where a sort of adaptation to the changing world is needed. Much is being automated, and many automated tasks will be done differently, sort of administrative tasks will be done differently in the future. And the progressive accounting agencies will move quite drastically to providing consulting services rather than managing an administration. And Briox simply exists to support in this transition, where we try to contribute with a more effective and more successful collaboration between the accounting agency, their consultants, and their end users, the small and medium-sized enterprises. If we go to the next slide, quickly about the markets. As I mentioned, Briox today operates in 4 markets: in Finland, which is where we have come the farthest, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And just to pull a comparison, the total size of these markets combined, both in terms of population and the number of companies operating in these markets, is about the same as Sweden, with the only difference being that as a total, the market growth is quite significantly higher than Sweden. We've also chosen to be present in this markets because of the high digital literacy. I would say to some degree, these markets are even more advanced when it comes to using digital services than Sweden, although this is perhaps not the case fully in the accounting agency, but things are happening or changing there quite rapidly also. We have also chosen these markets because the setup in which how you work as a small to medium-sized business owner together with an accounting agency is very similar to Sweden in the model that we know, where about 80% of all companies are linked to in some way to an accounting agency and getting help from there. And also, from a synergy point of view, we have several customers operating in all 4 markets, so there are also synergies to be had in serving customers that operate across the border. So all in all, we feel that these markets together make up a good base for Briox to expand into the future. If we move on to look at our product, it's basically a very powerful software as a service platform that enables a what we believe is a very effective collaboration between, on the one hand, the accounting agency and the accounting consultant and the small business owner. And the unique thing is that they are able to work in the same system, so not using different systems. So everything is integrated and works seamlessly together. It's just that the different parties do different things in the system. We've also now, after having spent significant development time, we now have a product that is adapted and fit to meet the local needs of the markets. Because it's worth mentioning that there are, although the platform is the same, there are quite significant differences from a legal point of view and also from a needs point of view in these different markets. But the platform we have now has now been adapted to fit the markets where we operate. It's also a module-based product, meaning that both parties can put together the modules that they find suitable just to fit their needs. So all in all, it's a fully cloud-based product, which is more or less ready to go in all our 4 markets. Next slide, please. We are certainly in a scale-up period as a company. And in that light, it's of course critical to have an effective sales model. So what we've done now in the last year is to really clarify how we go to market. And what you see here is basically how we take on all the markets that we work. So of course we are out now knocking a lot of doors and acquiring more agencies. But what's important to highlight is that the moment we sign up an agency, that's when I would say the real work begins, because the typical agency starts quite small, bringing on maybe 1 or 2 consultants who try this system out. Typically, an accounting agency works with many different systems. So they try their wings, they get familiar with the system, they perhaps bring in some of their end users and start working in Briox. In this process, it's critical for us to have a very efficient and well-functioning onboarding process where we work very closely with the customers to train the agency consultants, to get them familiar with this way of working so that they feel confident to expand and let more consultants start working this way. And ultimately then having the confidence and the ability to bring in their users. And that's how the model sort of scales up. And once this ecosystem is sort of in place, there is a continuous joint business development process to be had where we develop together and ideally then bring in and introduce more services and provide even more value, both to the agency consultants and then ultimately to their end users. So it's a straightforward sales model with new business acquisition, sophisticated and systematic onboarding, and then continuous upselling along down the line. If we move on and look at slide 11, to summarize our sort of business proposition and where we believe we stand out, needless to say, there are many players in this field, many good players, I would say, but there are in some areas where we think we have an especially strong proposition. First of all, compared to many of the more established players in this field, we are a truly SaaS ERP system, meaning that we are 100% cloud-based. We were born in the cloud. That's where we have our DNA, and that's what we used to. Whereas some of the other players have an on-premises platform and try to transform into a cloud-based service. We also very strongly believe in the power of having an open, free API so that we can quickly integrate with what we believe are value-adding services. Examples of this are banks, which we easily integrate into our system, which is very important both for the accounting agencies and their end users. But it can also be other services such as salary management systems. But the idea is that we fill our system with whatever makes the life easier for the accounting agencies and their interaction with their end users. We also believe, or we know, that we have a very strong product proposition in the markets where we operate. And as I mentioned, these are markets that are highly digitalized. We also have a very scalable go-to-market model, and I'll show you in a second how that scales up in practice. We already now, although we're in a scale-up phase, I believe that we have proof of concept in the sense that we already have a little bit more than 170 accounting agencies signed up already using Briox. And then the interesting piece when it comes to growing and then over time transforming into hopefully a highly profitable business is that we have a product with a very high gross margin so that when we scale up, it quickly turns it into revenue and profit. We also have a subscription model where more than 95% of our revenue is annual recurring revenue. So unless we train clients, it's a very sticky business model. And last but not least, and this is important for the future, once we have the customer base in place, it's a very expandable product offer, meaning that we can easily enter into other services that can where we can extend the product line and build the business on the existing product customer base. Next slide, please. I wanted to show you just a typical example of how we typically enter a new partnership with an accounting agency, and then that scales up. And this is important to understand because it's sort of by definition, especially in this slightly conservative at times industry, it's a process that sometimes takes time, and it needs to take time. But on the other hand, it has a very interesting upside. So typically, as I mentioned, when we enter a new partnership, it's on a tryout basis at first, where one or two accounting consultants try this out with the blessing of the company, but they get acquainted with the system. They try to adapt this way of working to see how it should work when the accounting agency hopefully scales up. And this consultant will typically bring in a handful of customers where they try this out. So as you can see, the annual revenue with this initial setup is quite limited. But if we move on, after some time, when next slide, please. When the consultant feels confident, typically more consultants are brought on board, and they in turn then add more end users and their customers into the mix. And as you can see, from a very small starting point, quite quickly this starts scaling up. And if we move to the next slide, in a typical case where we have, this could be a slightly bigger than accounting firm, when you have 10 consultants, and each consultant then has 10 clients on board, quite significantly or quite quickly, the revenue keeps growing. And next slide, please. As you can see in this typical case, if you move on, please, to the next slide. If we would have, again, this is a medium-sized agency most likely, in the case where you would have 10 consultants operating in Briox, each consultant has about 20 customers that they serve. They typically have more, but let's assume 20. And as we're seeing, most of these customers or end users typically use them more than one license or module or service. You can see that the initial roughly €1,000 revenue per year is significantly bigger once an agency is fully on board, working in this type of way, in this collaborative way with their end users. As I mentioned, this typically takes time. In some cases, it's a faster process. Sometimes it's a much slower process, but it's important to understand how this model is supposed to scale up. We've come the farthest, as I mentioned, in Finland, whereas in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, our focus primarily is to sign on the agencies and then in the next round, bring on the end users. If we move on, please. I wanted to show you, as I mentioned, the sort of the engine of this business model is going through the accounting agencies. And here you can see quarter on quarter the number of agencies that we have brought on board. And as of now, we stand at a little bit more than 170 agencies that are, to a larger or lesser degree, operating with the Briox system. If we move on, please. I wanted to round off here a little bit, just showing you examples of the partners that we already have on board. And I wanted to mention this more as a proof of concept that although we are at an early stage and really a scale-up phase, it's important that we have managed to establish the trust of these partners. On the integration side, you can see Swedbank, SEB, Holvi, to mention some of the banks that are working with us, that are fully integrated into our system, so that our customers can use seamlessly switching between these systems, so it's integrated in the product. We also have already both small and smaller accounting agencies as customers. BDO as an example of one of the bigger ones that operates across several of our markets. But we also have local players like Leinonen and Numeri and other Norian and other agencies starting to work with us. So this gives me strong confidence about that we have something that is of interest in these markets. And if you please move on, I wanted to round off just to frame sort of where we stand at the moment. I think that there are several, I would say, barriers that sort of need to be overcome for a company like Briox when we enter new markets with a slightly new way of operating. I think the first step, and where we come the furthest, is of course to have and be able to offer a platform that is powerful enough that can do the job, and that is something that both the agencies and the end users can work with in their daily job. I think here dare to say that we have we have in place, although we are of course continuously developing our product offer, especially in the Baltics. But this part we've come a long way. Secondly, is to bring this offer and actually gain the trust of the potential customers. And here I'm talking as a first step then to the accounting agencies. And with 170 agencies already working with us, I think we have proof of concept in this regard as well. So our big focus now as a company, and what will be the focus in the years to come, is of course to continue signing more accounting agencies, bring on more integration partners, and then together with them, the big focus is then to introduce the end users into the Briox system, for our system to fully work and for us to really bring the value to our accounting agencies and their end users. And this is our big focus right now and what we'll be focusing on in the years to come. We currently have about 6,000 end users in the system, and this is a number that I will work hard to bring up in the near, medium, and long future. So with that, I round off. If you move to the next slide, I want to thank you for listening to me, and again, I appreciate you having the interest to follow Briox and hopefully be with us on a very interesting journey in the years. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. Let's continue this presentation with some brief questions. I'd like to stay on the OPEX topic initially. I know that in recent years you have expanded into several new markets. You mentioned Lithuania, also in Estonia and Latvia, of course. And that has, of course, dragged up your OPEX levels a little bit. How should we think around OPEX going forward? Do you feel like you have a good level at the current state, or could further investments drag up the OPEX even more?
Right. I think it's a very, very good question. And of course, the nature of this business is that you have to invest quite significantly in order to be able to play ball, so to speak. And of course, expanding into new markets and with such a, in a way, slow business model, which we have, that means that you actually drive cost ahead of revenue for some time. It's difficult to say exactly where we'll end up, but I think that we are at a reasonably good level when it comes to OpEx at the moment. We have expanded into these new markets. We have local organizations on the ground. And I think our big focus now is to make our model work in the way I've described today with the resources we have at hand. Having said that, I think we should stay open to accelerating even further as soon as we see our model scaling up. But to answer your question, I think we are at a reasonably good level where we are right now, but we're open to scaling up faster if and when we feel that is the appropriate thing to do.
Perfect. And historically, you've and also as you've gone through the presentation, is that you may primarily focus on the accounting bureaus as you go through it, as they in turn upsell your products to the end customers. So far, this strategy has been successful, I'd say, given the rapid growth you've had in the amount of sold licenses. But how do you actually make sure that the consultancies actually recommend your products to the end consumers?
Exactly. No, I mean, you're asking the right questions. And I think that if you take on a model such as ours, I mean, having the agency signed up is a prerequisite for doing anything, which is why that needs to be a focus. Where I think that, again, I don't have all the history with Briox, but what I want to drive, what I think personally is very important, is that you have to work very closely with the agency to ensure that they understand the concept, that they feel confident to actually invite their customers into this mix. And I'm saying their customers because you could, of course, as a company like ours, have a strategy where you go straight to the end user. Some do. We believe, as I mentioned, that the winning route is to go through the agency, but then that also requires that you work very closely, which is why we're now in the coming year going to focus a lot on being much more systematic when it comes to onboarding the agencies and together with them systematically onboarding and introducing end users. I think this is something that has been done well to some degree and not so well to some degree historically. I personally think that you should be systematic about this, and having a very good product should almost be seen as a hygiene factor. But where I would love to see, where I think Briox can have a very strong competitive advantage further down the line, is to be very good at onboarding and actually working with the agencies to sign them up. And to answer your question, if we do this well, I'm very confident that they will then actively endorse Briox over maybe some other alternatives, because they appreciate the way of working and the service they get as a whole working with us.
Thank you, Johan. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for any further questions, but thank you for attending at our event here today.
Thank you very much.